All right. Well, thank you all, everyone, for joining early and for joining us for our first Graduate Careers Exploration Week panel on careers in primarily undergraduate institutions. We have a fantastic lineup of alumni today. So we're really excited to learn all about working and teaching at PUI. So be sure to have all of those questions ready. So just a few housekeeping items before we get started. As I mentioned before, the session will be recorded and the recording will be available later on next week on our YouTube channel and also on our Media Space channel, and you'll get all the information in an email later next week. So in terms of questions, this is a networking session, so please, if possible, do turn on your cameras on because I'm sure alumni would really love to see your faces and get to know you all a little bit better. And this is a chance for you all to ask questions, and this session is all for you. So my role for today is just to hang out in the background, facilitate our conversation, and ask any questions, but all the questions should ideally be coming from you, so definitely have those questions ready. And also in terms of asking questions, feel free to either unmute yourself and ask it that way, or if you're uncomfortable asking it, you can also send it to me directly through private message, and I'm happy to ask for you. Or if you want, you can also use the reaction button at the bottom and raise your hand to ask questions as well. But yeah, that's pretty much it from me. For those of you who don't know or who we haven't met yet, my name is Jennifer Thesneem, and I'm the Career Services Coordinator here in the School of Chemical Sciences Career Services Office. I'm sure you've gotten lots of emails from me about this event. But again, we want to start off our conversation by having our alumni introduce themselves. So alumni, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, telling us a little bit about where you're working, what your role is at your current institutions, and get us started off that way. So since Jennifer is first on my list, I'm gonna hand it over to Jennifer.
Hi, hello to the students.
Oops. Sorry about that.
Now, Jennifer.
Sorry. Go
Hi,
ahead.
students. So I'm Jennifer VanAntwerp. I am a professor of engineering at Calvin University, which is in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I did earn my master's and PhD in chemical engineering from Illinois a very long time ago. I have been at Calvin for 25 years now. Calvin has about just under 3,000 undergraduate students. I would say about 10% of those are engineering students. And then in chemical engineering, that's the smallest of the kinds of engineering we teach. So it's quite a small program. I have kind of an unusual position. My husband has all the same degrees that I have. So when we both left University of Illinois, we were doing the how do you find two jobs together thing. And Calvin University offers a job share for spouses, which I have not heard of. So we are each tenured to a 50% position, and we've been sharing that way for 25 years. Although we've only worked one FTE, one full-time equivalent, for 1 year out of those 25. So we have the option to scale up, and we have, depending on kind of the year in our family and the other obligations going on. The highest I think we've ever had is 1.8. So we've ranged in there. And I think that's enough for introduction, unless you've got another specific thing, Jennifer.
No, that's great. I'll then pass it over to Sarah.
All right, hi everyone, welcome. I know some of your names are familiar, but I'm Sarah Krueger. I graduated from Illinois in 2022, and I am currently at Mount St. Mary's University in Emmitsburg, Maryland. We have about 4,000 students on our campus, 90% undergraduate students. We also have some graduate students in business, but we don't have any science graduate programs. Business is our largest graduate program. we're about 40% students of color. Actually, right now we're about 48%, so we're increasing there. So we serve a unique population where we're a private school, so we have students from very different backgrounds coming through our institution. And yeah, so this is my second year. Actually, on Wednesday, I'm going up for my second year tenure review. I'm preparing for my meeting in between. So yeah, I'm happy to answer questions about the very beginning, but I'm very new to the PUI field.
So I guess I'm next. Hi, everyone. I'm Brett Hemric. I did not get an official degree at the University of Illinois, but I was a postdoc there for 2 years in the Denmark group. And I am at the University of Tampa in Tampa, Florida. And we are a PUI institution. I think we are an R1. They think we're the same thing as University of Miami. We are not. We do have about 10,000 students on campus, so we have quite a number, but overall our science, specifically within chemistry, is quite small. We have about 5 to 6 chemistry graduates on an average year. So we're pretty small within that. We are a service department, we always say, because we have quite a number of bio majors that take a lot of our classes. So I teach organic chemistry. So I just actually, it was funny, Sarah was talking about the tenure thing. I just went up for my mid-tenure review in January, just finished that up yesterday. So very similar type of thing, but it's a quick, a lot of work in that regard. So anyway, I think that's about all that I was going to say with that. I'm again happy to answer any questions about any other things.
Hi, I'm Amy, and I apologize. My voice sounds a little bit sick today, but I'm on the Met. And thank you so much for having us here today. So I graduated from University of Illinois in 2016. I got a chemistry PhD degree with Professor Tom Rothfuss. And I'm currently at St. Mary's College of California, not to be confused with Mount St. Mary's. It's about 25 miles east of San Francisco. And we have primarily undergraduate students. We have about 2,000 undergraduate students. Our department is also quite small, just like what Brett was saying. We're also considered quote unquote a service department. So even though we have one of the largest classes on campus, 35 students in our general chemistry courses, we graduate about 5 chemistry majors each year. Yeah, and I'd be happy to answer more questions as they come up.
So thank you all for those introductions. Students and postdocs, I'm going to turn it over to you for any questions that you may have for our panelists. Let's see who is brave to go first. All right, I see Howard raised your hand, so go ahead, Howard.
Hey, good morning. I'm a 4th-year chemical engineering PhD student, Baron Peters group. So I came from a PUI as well. I went to HBCU in South Georgia, small school, 3,000 students. And that is more of the interest from if I was to go academia route, I think I would like to pursue that. So I was curious if you guys could speak on at what point of your graduate journey did you decide you want to go this route versus the traditional research faculty route?
Well, I'll jump in quickly. It was a different world, I think, 25 years ago. My advisor, who's no longer at Illinois, when I wasn't actually going to do that. I interviewed for jobs in industry, and I was weighing already three jobs with companies when this job kind of fell into my lap. So it was kind of a leap, but this is why I originally went to graduate school. I wanted to teach undergraduates. And then I had talked to some schools and it didn't seem like a good fit, kind of in year 3 and 4. So I kind of abandoned that. But then this seemed like a good fit when it came along. So I guess, but when I did that, my advisor was pretty stunned. He thought that that was a career suicide. And he reluctantly wrote a letter of recommendation that, I mean, it was positive, but he's like, do you really want to do this? I'll write the letter if you want. So that was he didn't understand at all what I was doing or what it would look like, but I'll stop there.
So Howard, I also went to a primarily undergraduate institution, and when I went to grad school, I think like Jennifer, that was my intention, was to go to a primarily undergraduate institution. I think I explored a lot in grad school, but I ended up back at this school. I think doing like different things throughout grad school helped me affirm that this is what I wanted to do. And I guess my advisor is also no longer at Illinois, and also not super supportive of kind of that career suicide mindset for sure. But I will tell you that I don't think that's the case. I feel very fulfilled, and I feel like I'm doing really important work. I'm sure others echo that as well.
Yeah, I can definitely, that is a hard question. In terms of, that's one that you wrestle with a lot. I definitely think students have like, know what you want to do when you grow up. And I'm like, well, when I find that out, I'll let you know. But I think it was one of those things where when I was an undergrad, I did a lot of work as a teaching assistant, because I also went to a primarily undergraduate institution. And so that's what I saw, was getting to teach. And I began to really, really enjoy that. That's something I felt, helping my peers or those people that I was TAing make those connections. It was a very fulfilling process. And certainly with regards to being in an R1 or even being in industry, there are opportunities for that. I'm not going to say there are not. But I felt like I would have much more of an opportunity to teach students. And then as I got into research, both in graduate school and then a postdoc, I realized how much I enjoyed research as well. And so I wanted to find some place that that struck a good balance, because you can obviously go to places and all you do is teach, and that's great. If that's what you like, that is what you want to go. But I also found that I like to explore things. I like to make new discoveries. I like to uncover new information. That's what I tell students all the time. And as a result, I looked for some place that had a good balance of both, where I was able to teach, but then I also was able to have my own research space, my own lab, my own projects. And so overall, that was really what kind of was born out of that, was the desire to teach and do a lot of teaching, but also still do research when I wanted to. And I feel like I've struck that happy medium there.
Yeah, so I didn't actually go to a primarily undergraduate institution. I received most of my formal education in Taiwan, and the education system is pretty different there. I didn't know what a primarily undergraduate student was until my postdoc. So I've always had the idea that I knew that I wanted to teach, but going through graduate school at UIUC and throughout my postdoc at University of Washington and University of Pennsylvania, I figured that wasn't quite a good fit for me, I guess. And so my postdoctoral advisor was actually very influential in kind of shaping my career trajectory. And she kind of like gave me the time to explore these like alternative pathways. So as a postdoc, that I never taught formally as a graduate student. Like I did like 2 years of TAing, but that was it. But I had the time because of a supportive postdoc advisor, I had the time during my postdoc to start doing a little bit of formal teaching and kind of exploring that route. Yeah, so I was very lost for a very long time, and I had many people kind of like guide me on my way, and I'm very grateful for where I am today. And this is a really good fit. I absolutely love my job.
So thank you all for sharing that insight. I know after Howard, there was another person who raised their hand, but I can't remember their name. But there's also a few questions in the chat that I'm going to move on to. But yeah, if you want to raise your hand again, that would be fine too. So a question from, okay, whoever raised your hand, you can go ahead now.
Yeah, hello everyone, and thank you so much for this session. I think this is quite informative. So just a quick question. To be fair, I'm not seriously considering academia, but I'm kind of interested in exploring the options. So I work mostly in, well, I don't work in business, but mostly management, and it's quite a fast-paced environment. So I'm wondering if any of the alumni have this transition from business or a fast-paced environment to basically academia. So maybe we could see a comparison, or how does it work out? So because I'm also guilty of this notion or idea that it's kind of like a retiring job when you go into academia. I'm so sorry, but I think some people have this idea, but I think this is a good opportunity to correct the misunderstandings here. So thank you so much.
Are we going to go in order or not? I don't.
No, you can jump in.
I was just going to say, I have no experience within the business, but I'll tell you that the pace that I'm going at right now has never been faster. There are not enough hours in the day to do all the things that I have to do, much less the things that I want to do. So in terms of just like time, if you're looking for a fast-paced environment, I would not worry about that. The pace will find you. But if you're concerned about, if you're looking for something to slow down, or and also you can find that as well. Some of it is depending on how much you want to take on. Like for me, I like to be involved in things, promotion of the department, revamping of website features, recruiting of students to try to just increase the interest in doing research within the department. But you can also scale back to that to some effect, maybe less so pre your tenure, but definitely after that, you can scale back some on that. And a lot of it is open to how much you want to take on. And for me, I seem to just take on things until I have no more time to take on things. So I think other people may be able to echo that kind of idea.
Yeah, everything Brett just said, I totally agree. I think one of the things about academia is you can choose sometimes to a certain degree what you want to charge ahead full speed on. So for example, right now, I do chemical experimental research in the lab, and I'm an organometallic chemist. I have students doing inorganic synthesis every day. But we also have research, empirical research in the classroom as well. And at the same time, if you decide that you want to meet with all of your students one-on-one in your 100 enrollment classroom, you can do that. I think the nice thing is that there's a certain degree of flexibility. Like you can go full steam ahead on what you wish to. I think that's kind of the nice thing about it.
Yeah, I think the challenge for me, and this might partly because I'm part-time, part-time is a challenging role because it's hard to draw those boundaries. It's not like I have a 40-hour-a-week job and I can clock out at 30 hours because I have a 2/3 job this year of an undefined number of hours. And so what tends to work is, for right now, for example, I often leave the office at 3 because I've got some kid duties to run around, but I tend to work at home from about 8 o'clock to midnight or 1 o'clock. So there's a trade-off, and some days I'm too tired to do that and I show up not as well prepared the next morning. So there's a lot of independent contractor in this job, but all of you, the fact that you're in the roles you're at University of Illinois, you're driven, high-achieving people, and you don't like the feeling of showing up not prepared and not doing your best. And so to do your best, academia will take as much as you will give, and there's no limit, there's no place where you're done. That has been, I think, my hugest challenge is we talk about work-life balance, but there's no balance, right? In the sense that it's more like, how much can I put up with not doing my best because I actually need to sleep 6 hours tonight, not 4. And that, that's a choice you have to work out. But I will say I came right here, so I didn't work for a company. I did take one of my sabbaticals. I took 6 months and I worked for environmental engineering firm in town. That was interesting because and they paid me hourly like an intern, So it was a clock in, clock out job. But I was also, it was billable hours. So it was an interesting mix for me. I felt like when I walked in the door, I had to be doing billable hours. So I actually like felt guilty taking a bathroom break because I wasn't. So that pace, I don't have that in my job. I work all the time, but I also am my own schedule boss, if that makes sense. But when I had that job, also, when I left at the end of the day, I left it behind me. I didn't take homework. And that is a huge difference when you think about kind of the overall stress load of your work life. So.
Yeah, I also came right to academia, but I had previous experience before graduate school working in a government lab. And I will say that I think the pace of the work that I do now is much faster than anything that I did in the government lab. And it could be because of the different bureaucracy in a government lab versus an industrial career, right? But I do think I agree with all of these sentiments that, you can really push on what you'd like to push on and make the pace what you'd like it to be. And I think the nice thing is that even semester to semester, that could be a little bit different, right? Like this semester, I was willing to take an overload, so I'm teaching one extra lab. And so my pace on the normal day is much faster than last semester. And next semester, I said, I'm not doing that again. So, you have the flexibility to change that as well, to say, I might want to try a different pace, or I want to step back, or I want to increase, whatever that might be. You have some flexibility there, of course, with the approval of your chair, but you have flexibility in that.
Great. Thank you all so much for those very real responses. I appreciate that. So going into the questions in the chat, Vijay asked, he's curious if each of your programs have lab classes in which undergrads work in research projects. He's heard about it in various places, but curious what it looks like in each of your institutions. Whoever wants to go first.
So I can answer this one. So I teach organic chemistry primarily. I teach one section of Gen Chem, but I teach primarily organic. And so all the labs that I teach are in the organic area. I did a visiting role at Hope College, and they had this model where the second semester of organic chemistry was I forget what they call it, but we call it independent projects, where students have the opportunity to choose a research project that they want to work on. So within faculty guidance, right? But that they're able to, let's say that a biology lab needs a compound synthesized, they're able to spend the second semester, using the skills they built in the first semester to do that research and to work on that. Or maybe they're in a biology research lab. We also have lots of biology students in our classes, lots of pre-med students who are taking organic chemistry because they have to, not necessarily because they love chemistry. And so they're able to kind of bring in the research that they like. And of course, we have to offer them guidance because some of them have no idea what they want to do. But the idea is that by the end of the semester, they've done some kind of independent research so that when they go on at sophomore, junior level, they have some research experience and are prepared then, what does research look like? And if they're not already involved in research, that they can continue in undergraduate research in a faculty's lab. So this is like the model of our second semester organic class. We don't do that kind of thing in the first semester. I find that when students come to me in first semester organic, they just aren't ready for that independence yet. And so we spend first semester building up those skills. And then in our second semester, we do more of like that course-based undergraduate research, but it's like each group is doing a different research project of their choosing under the mentorship of one of our faculty members.
And I think everything that Sarah said, I very much agree. I think for PU, if that's something that you're interested in, is developing like research projects within a course, I think a primarily undergraduate institution is the best place to do that for a couple of reasons. And I think off the top of my head, what I can think of is oftentimes our classes are a little bit smaller, so it's a little bit more nimble to kind of like tweak the course experiments. Another reason is, at least at St. Mary's, and I think maybe a lot of PUIs, most of our lab courses, we don't have TAs teaching them. Like all of our lab courses, they're tenure track faculty that are teaching them. And again, so we have a little bit more control over like how we teach these courses. And then another thing is a lot of funding, federal funding, likes to invest in this type of project. So in a lot of the NSF funding that's specifically set aside for two-year institutions and what they call R2 or primarily undergraduate institutions, they very much focus on the fact that you have a plan to increase broader participation of research among undergraduate students. It's something that's understood as being pretty common in primarily undergraduate institution.
I don't, specifically here, we have some courses that run that way. I only have taught since I've been here. So we have a lot of students going through that, and so we don't really do that kind of model. But there are other classes, especially upper level classes, that I've seen that with, that I personally just don't have experience with.
So we do not have that among our engineering students. Most of my chemical engineering students are double major in chemistry. With our curriculum, it's only a few extra classes. To get the chemistry degree, they're required to do at least one course that is research with a faculty member. And so it's not a lab class, it's in the faculty members research group doing their scholarship with them. And usually that turns into some additional work during the school year or a summer research placement. So our science departments, almost all the faculty do a summer research program employing 1 to 4 undergrads in their project. That each of the students gets a stipend supported by the university. So the engineers, we don't do that because most of them are working for a summer internship with a company. But like I said, a lot of our students are double majoring. So a lot of my students, maybe their first or second summer, are doing research in the chemistry or biology department. And then they'll usually try an internship in their third summer and then kind of figure out what's a good path for them. But also, of course, in sciences, you really need that research experience for graduate school. In engineering, I send a ton of my chemical engineers to graduate school without a lot of research. If they've maybe done that one semester, or even if they've only had internships, they can get into graduate school just fine. So it's a little bit different culture. We do also have for engineering a senior design course. So our students form groups of 3 or 4 students. They pick their own project and they work on it the whole year as part of that class. So it's not quite research. It's more project-based for engineering.
All right, thank you. So the next question in the chat was from Tim. Curious as to how many hours on average you spend teaching versus research versus administrative or other tasks.
I'd be happy to start. And but before I answer that question, I just want to say that all of these questions that you're asking in the chat, they're very, very good. And you're probably already thinking that there's a lot of variability between different institutions. You're probably right. And these are very good questions to ask your potential employer when you go on the job market. So as to how much hours that we spend at St. Mary's for these different tasks, St. Mary's is considered a little on the teaching heavy side type of institution. So we teach 6 courses about every year. So 3 courses in the fall, 3 courses in spring. So I teach about on average 1 course a day. And these courses could be ranging from 60 to 90 minutes. And most of my afternoons are reserved for research with students and doing administrative tasks. So I try to keep it pretty balanced, but because the teaching load also kind of varies every year depending on if we need more people to teach certain classes. But it's definitely something that you should talk to about with your employer and kind of get the basic expectations before you consider taking the job.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, is that each institution does have a different teaching load, and sometimes institutions will count your teaching load differently. So in my institution, we teach 3 classes a semester as well. But for me, if I teach like organic chemistry lecture and lab, for me, that counts as 2 classes. So sometimes lab is counted the same or not counted, I should say, right? Like if you teach a lecture in a lab, that might count as 1. So definitely that could be a difference. So I teach actually, I teach Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I prefer to set my schedule so that I have Tuesday, Thursday completely open for research. But that's really a flexibility that you have. And so I really try to block my Tuesday and Thursday for my research students, and say, as much as possible, I'm going to avoid having meetings on these days. I'm going to avoid having to grade things on these days, although it doesn't always work that way. But yeah, so I think blocking your schedule is really important, because I think this was really said earlier a lot, but a lot of things in academia will take as much time as you give them. And so making sure that you carve out that time to balance your schedule how you expect it, or how your institution and your department expect you to allot that time, so that you're able to progress toward, if you're on the tenure track, or toward your next promotional milestone.
So I'm at a different place in my career, so that has changed a lot over the years. Our kind of general institutional idea is that you'd spend 70 to 75% of your time on teaching related, which would be in the classroom, class prep, grading, office hours, all of those things. And then we have, of course, still advising students. I have 20 to 25 undergrads that I do academic advising for. And that's actually a pretty substantial amount of my time in terms of meeting with them every semester for courses, but also writing all their letters of recommendation and helping them find internships and all of those things that add. And they always want to stop in and chat, which is part of why I want to do this job, but it can be time consuming and it's hard to plan for. And now I'm at a point in my career after all these years that I have fairly significant administrative roles. So I would say I probably spend more than the average amount on that as well. Also, teaching varies a lot. As you mentioned, I think several of you, by the courses. So we have a small department. We have many kinds of engineering. And I'm a chemical engineer, but I also teach 1st and 2nd year courses kind of across the spectrum, depending on who's on sabbatical and what we need. I get a new course to teach very frequently, every 2 years sometimes. We just had a retirement, so I'm picking up a new course every semester. When you're teaching a brand new course, your teaching is all of your time. And so I'm having a lot of rough nights these last couple of years. But once you have taught a course a few times, that you can put a little bit more in the box. Like, I know it's going to take me this many hours a day, and then I can be done with it. Right now, for example, I'm teaching thermodynamics, which I last saw as an undergraduate almost 3 decades ago. So it's a lot of preparation for me to first read the book and relearn thermodynamics, and then figure out how to parse that and teach my students. So that's, I would say, untold hours right now for me. But a couple of years ago, I had 2 different sections of introductory material science, which I can read the topic in the book in 15 minutes and I can parse that. So those sorts of things, just a lot of variation with what your assignments are. And I think, as you said, you can work with your department chair, but also as you get more senior, you kind of have that responsibility to take on that load so that the new people coming in can work with their department chair and get reasonable loads as they're building all the things going on in their career.
Yeah, so at this point, I'm just echoing a lot of the things that have been said. At University of Tampa, we have 12, we're contracted for 12 contact hours. And our labs count as full load, which means basically they wouldn't, a lot of times you'll see half. And so if you teach a lab, Sarah was talking about it be counting as 1, sometimes you'll see it'll count as 1.5. And so if you need to teach 3 courses, you might be teaching a 2 lecture sections and a lab, but that doesn't actually count as 3. Or it may count as 3. It just depends on the university. So we get full credit for our labs. That's a fantastic thing for us, at least. And So yeah, also I'm in a really nice groove now where I teach organic 1 in the fall, organic 2 in the spring, and then I teach the labs associated with those. So I've kind of got everything set up at this point to where that part can kind of move on its own. And that really helps a lot because you're not having to constantly, as Jennifer was saying, relearn things, rework on things. That doesn't mean you're not always tweaking it. I'm always messing with things. I'm always like, the way I explained that did not quite flow as well as I wanted it to. Let me rework that section of the notes and whatnot. But at the end of the day, once you get it going, that helps a lot. As far as like numerical hours, I'm not even really gonna, I don't know, it all flows together at some point. So you're always just, it's like what needs to be done. There's always grading that needs to be done. You're always working on something. There's always some proposal that needs to be read or whatnot. You learn to prioritize a lot. And I think that's the big thing is there's so many things you want to do, but you have to do the things that are, tomorrow depends upon. So I definitely, the way that we set it up, it's supposed to be about 60-ish% teaching, and then that remaining 40% will be divided between research and service work, which is just things you do for the department, committees that you're on, all the things that you didn't have to do in graduate school. And you're like, some of these things are not nearly as fun as they might have seemed to be. Faculty meetings are not fun. They're just not. They're just things you have to do. You might think that they're all getting in there and having a party. They're not. It's just a thing they have to do. So.
I did want to jump back in because you made me think. I didn't mention we also have a 6 credit or 6 course a year expectation, 3 and 3. But our university does have pretty generous support for course buyouts. So if I have a project I'm working on, I can apply to buy out 1 or 2 courses in the coming year. It's a little tricky because it's hard to know a whole year in advance where you're going to be to make that proposal. It's not, the timing's not great, but I have taken advantage of that, which opens up room periodically for more like getting a project going or wrapping up a project. And I don't know how common that is, but it's something to ask about when you're talking to a school. What is their internal support for scholarship? And I'll say partly kind of into a new question, I find external support has been more challenging for me because the scale of project that you might go to the NSF for, it's really hard for me to find the resources to propose a project and complete it in a reasonable timeline for an NSF type of project. I don't have graduate students. I don't have facilities of support like a cell sorter like you have at Illinois. So I've made more use of the internal support for smaller projects, but the fact that I have that as an option is really important. It's really supported where I've been able to go.
Awesome. Thank you all for those insights. Lots of dedication, lots of planning, and hopefully our students are taking note of all those things. So the next question also in the chat was from a postdoc. From my graduate school TAing experience, I've realized I find teaching more fulfilling. I would like to move to a teaching position after my postdoc. Can I know how you find tenure track primarily teaching roles and different kinds of positions out there, either only teaching or teaching plus research?
I mean, I guess I can, I think that just to clarify that what the question is asked is like where you find these jobs, like looking for like a job search site or something like that. I think maybe is the root of this question. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, there are lots of resources out there. One of the biggest ones, if you've never heard of it, Kim Jobber out there, he has ridiculously good organized by all these different things, when the due dates are, things like that. And so Kim Jobber is definitely a very helpful Excel sheet that he puts together every single year. But then you can make search engines that pull off all these new jobs as they come around on any typical job site. Sometimes they'll pull weird things, but you just ignore those and move on to the next thing. But that's at least what I did. I used his sheet, but then I also had my own, and I just set up all these alerts through all these different job sites that would pull, a teaching professor or assistant professor in chemistry or a related discipline. And so then I would just get pings off of those kind of things and organize it for myself.
It's going to depend too on kind of what your criteria are. We always advertise ours in the same places: Chronicle of Higher Ed, the professional journals. We'll post them in like the jobs board for SWE or for NSBE. And those generally get pulled to the job search boards that you're talking about, Brett. But I will also say in chemical engineering, it's a really small universe as opposed to chemistry. So I think there's maybe 100, 120 total schools that have chemical engineering in the US. And those that are PUIs is a much smaller number. And so if you're in chemical engineering, I would actually recommend that you just make the list and then check those school websites very directly. Keep an eye on kind of when they might be hiring.
Yeah, that's the same advice that I would give. So ChemJobber is a really great place to go. That's where I definitely started my search, just kind of getting a feel for what was out there. I also, on LinkedIn, you can set up like alerts for like specific keyword jobs, right? So I think I still need to take it down because sometimes I still get emails like, oh, this school is hiring, right? And so if you have a specific location preference or a specific, these are my top 5 schools, I would recommend definitely checking those websites. The position I'm actually in now, I applied for before it was on ChemJobber because I just checked the website and it happened to be there. So definitely, if there's a specific place that you want to be sure to check those websites too.
Yeah, echoing everything that all of my esteemed colleagues have said. ChemJobber, very useful. And I think a few years ago, they started also posting teaching only positions as well. So being able to make that differentiation between teaching versus teaching plus research, I think that should be hopefully it'll seem pretty straightforward to you when you start your search. For me, and maybe some of you are thinking about this question, how positions really vary is within the positions that do teaching plus research. There's a wide range of what people expect from you from research. There are primarily undergraduate institutions that would like to see at least a paper or a big grant before you go up for tenure. At St. Mary's College of California, we don't, but they do expect something like that for your full professorship. And I think a good way to kind of figure that out is just ask them what their teaching load is. So, for example, some of my colleagues at more research heavy institutions, their teaching load is 2.2 versus 3.3, meaning that they are giving you a lower teaching load. So you should probably expect that they have more expectations for your research. So definitely something that varies between institution, and you should ask.
Amy, I would caution on that too. It doesn't always go with teaching load, and that's a real trap that you have to watch for. So I would very specifically ask, as you get in the process with a specific school, can you show me your expectations for tenure? Because I certainly talked to schools that would be a 3.3 and have an expectation that I would have said was hard to get at that kind of a place, right? In terms of your resources and your available time. And you also might need to look around at what the faculty there are actually publishing and see if what they say are their expectations match. Like, are they kind of exaggerating what they expect of you and they'll let less, or you have to do a little sleuthing.
Yeah, and I will say that these are some things that you won't know from a listing or from a position ad, right? Like, I learned so much being on the job market and interviewing and asking questions that I was like, I actually feel like it wasn't until I was interviewing that I knew exactly the type of load and research balance that I wanted. When I started talking to all these different places and different faculty to see how are you balancing this and what does this look like? And so I think that's something that you will get as you interview, but not necessarily as you read job postings. Some places they might say our teaching load is a 3.4 or something like that. And some places they have a public scholarship statement. Like our institution, you can go on our website, anyone can go on and find our scholarship statement for each department, but some places are not like that. So you might not know that until you start interviewing.
Great, thank you for, again, those comments and insights. So next question again from Howard. What are the factors you considered when choosing institutions to apply to and accept at your current institution? Also, when is kind of the appropriate time frame to apply?
Oh, I was just going to say when, before the application closes, definitely. That's really like the key thing that I always I had in my sheet was like, when is this application due versus the amount of time I had to get it done, because you're all busy. Everybody's busy. But I think as far as things that I chose to look at when I was applying, I wanted something that had a research component, and that when I looked at what they had infrastructure wise, I felt like I could get the job done that I wanted to get done. I think there's a question later on in the chat that hopefully we'll get to about how you're shaping research projects. But I had an idea of like the kind of things that I wanted to do. I did interview one place, and I realized that despite my research on them, they did not have an NMR. And as an organic chemist, in my mind, I'm done. Like as soon as I kind of realized that, I mean, because they said they did, but then they actually didn't. And so at that point, I realized this is not going to work. This is not a good match here. So you have to think, what are the kind of things that you want to do? If you want to do research, does that match up with what they have? Because if it's a small thing, you can probably get around that. But if it's a major impediment to getting progress done, it's not going to work. You're just going to be frustrated and feeling like, why can't they support me? But that's because they don't do that kind of thing. And as we kind of emphasized, there's a wide range of how much research is encouraged and supported depending on the institution that you're at. And so you can go to places where they have really good research infrastructure and everybody is striving for it. You have labs of 5 to 6 undergrads in each lab. You can go to places where there's maybe 1 or 0 per semester that you have. And you have to kind of decide, what do I want to do with regards to that? And sometimes you have to look and just see what is the current research infrastructure. You can get an idea sometimes from the website, but I think, as Sarah said, sometimes you don't realize this kind of stuff until you're interviewing, because there's a lot of things that are not obvious. And so you want to ask those questions, like, what kind of things does this department have that would support my goals? What type of instrumentation do they have? Especially if it's not abundantly clear from their website.
I would also, because of my experience, encourage you to think about your willingness to be flexible in your scholarship. I completely pivoted. I was doing fluorescence activated cell sorting. I was in a protein engineering lab. There's no way I have anywhere near the resources here that I needed. So I actually floundered for a few years, and my department fortunately was willing to let me flounder. So I was not at a sort of mature scholarship place when I got tenure, but I had several avenues that I was pursuing that seemed promising, and I had small conference publications, and they said that's fine. But I now do all of my research in the social science education area of engineering and engineering students and workforce, because that's not, it doesn't require any technical resources. We have like chemistry faculty who are doing technical research, but they have really kind of found a new area in a sense. They've done a turn, like you talked about, Brett. They maybe didn't have, we do have an NMR, but we didn't when I got here. So they were able to write a grant together and get one, but a lot of them also have kind of found a new area that makes better use of undergraduate students with limited time and the whatever facilities we do have.
Yeah, I think instrumentation and facilities is definitely something important to consider. One thing that you might think about, so I am on the East Coast now, I'm in Maryland, and within a 30-minute radius of us, there are at least 30 schools, I would say. Maybe an hour radius, there are 30 schools. So that ranges from like huge institutions to other primarily undergraduate institutions. And so one thing that I really rely on is collaboration. So like, for example, we have a confocal microscope that we share, and our collaborator, our colleagues, McDaniel University, they have an X-ray, right? So like we're able to share resources in that way, which for me was a huge benefit to thinking about where I was going to be. And it's also really cool because, you know, I'm one of 2 organic chemists at my institution, but knowing my colleagues at nearby institutions, I'm able to have kind of that bigger network to say, what are you doing in organic and is it working? Those kind of things, because it is sometimes it can be hard to be at a primarily undergraduate institution if you are the only organic chemist or the only analytical chemist or one of just a few. It's very different, I would say, from being in graduate school where you're surrounded by people who are experts in your field. I would say there are also some other like personal considerations that were important to me. So, I was really interested in whether they would help assist my spouse to find a job as I was moving. I had I guess they call it two-body opportunity now, right? At that point, it was a two-body problem, I suppose. But, figuring that out was really important to me. Was that, is there going to be support for that? What do the benefits look like? Am I going to be able to, I have a chronic health condition that I needed to make sure would be supported at that institution. And different places just have different benefit packages, right? So all those kind of things that think about like what matters most to your quality of life, because you have to live there and be there in that area, in that city, or not city. We're not in a city at all. So thinking about what matters to you personally, I think is also really important. And shouldn't be discounted as you look at opportunities to move.
Yes to all that was said, and also yes to all of the questions that are being asked. I think those are definitely important things to consider. I guess in retrospect, what I think I kind of subconsciously chose the departments that I thought I would have great colleagues. And that was, so before I started at St. Mary's College in 2022, I was at a different institution, Mills College, for 2 years. And those 2 years were really tough. It was during the pandemic and the school was closing down. So like all the students were transferring or jobs were disappearing. And I would not have been able to make it through that time, let alone have the motivation to reapply without colleague support. And that's the same at St. Mary's, is having a supportive department is really so important. They help you, kind of manage your service load, make sure that you're getting an appropriate teaching load, and not like forcing things on me, which I feel very lucky about. And the other part of the question that I wish to address a little bit, when is the appropriate time frame to apply? Personally, and I don't think that this is going to be applicable to everyone. I don't think that you should ever wait to see if there's going to be a better job market. I think going out and getting interviews, or even just the process of writing your proposal and your teaching statements, those are all things that will help you grow. Especially, I mean, we've all been through the pandemic and we all kind of have the feeling that some of these things are just not going to be within our control. So what you can control is just to be ready at as early as possible, right? Or you could be in a situation like me, like getting a job and then that job disappears within 2 years. So I would say don't wait to apply. And even if you don't get any interviews the first round, try again next year. I think that's pretty common, that people go multiple years on the job market.
I want to follow up on 2 of those things you said, Amy, that I think are important. One is do apply early, because we find sometimes that we get an application that's not a good fit for us right now, but we keep that person in mind because we sometimes have trouble finding people the next year. And so get on our radar and we'll contact you next time. And the other thing is, you talked about Mills College. I think I inferred that they were actually closing as an institution. That is the demographic for all of higher ed. If you don't know that, you should, that the number of students going to college is on a steep decline. And that means a lot of schools will be downsizing or closing. The example I'll give you, in Michigan, we've got our 2 flagship, Michigan State and University of Michigan. The way they've adapted to that declining number in the state is they just accept a greater percentage of their applications. So they actually, University of Michigan made a deliberate decision a few years ago. They saw this trend coming and they started accepting and taking like an extra 700 students a year into their freshman class. What that meant is that there were 700 fewer students available to all the small institutions in the region. And you're going to see more and more small institutions closing. That is a fact. And you can't necessarily know who it is, but I think it's fair to ask some questions and do some investigation about the financial health and the plans of your institution for how are they dealing with this reality of higher ed right now.
Yeah, I think that that's really important as you're on the market, getting some idea of like, what is their plan? And hopefully the answer is not, there is no plan, because that's not really a place that you want to be. But getting a feel for some kind of idea about that financial security. You can see a little bit from the numbers on paper, right? Like endowments and those kind of things, but you can't get all of the idea from what's on paper. The other thing I will say is that I think if you just look at what they're offering you on paper, that's not necessarily enough. So I had an institution that offered me a really high salary, but I felt that tenure there would mean nothing because I wasn't sure about the financial stability of the institution, not sure enough to take that high salary in order to go there. And so I think that's definitely something that you want to consider. And Amy is an excellent example of being able to, you're a hard worker, you can make it through, right? But I think that it's definitely something that you want to consider. I think also that second part of the question is the appropriate time frame. So our institution, I don't know why, but we always have done this where we have a position open until filled. And so like the typical cycle is that like we open positions in like August, September, October timeframe with the goal of hiring someone before the semester split. So we're interviewing them on campus before the end of the first semester so that we can have an offer to them and have a hire made by the start of the second semester. And so I think that's like the typical timeline, but I will say our institution has hired people off of that timeline too. So I would say don't give up on that timeline. That might be a good place to start your search, is with that kind of fall application cycle, but not give up, to stay out there, because there are institutions that have positions open. One of our faculty members last year got hired into a different department as the chair of entrepreneurship. And so then we were in the last minute, we had to fill a position, and it wasn't, it was not the timeline we normally have. So I would say don't give up on that timeline.
There was one thing I wanted to add to something Sarah said earlier, which was regard to sometimes you don't have as much interaction with colleagues that are like-minded, like in organic. I'm fortunate here, at least we have 4 other organic chemists on. It's kind of nice, but one thing I was going to add is that think about how much your sports travel, like to go to conferences and such, because some of those are incredibly expensive. And if you're going to fit that bill on your own, you're not going to go very often. And so you're not going to get to be part of that broader chemistry community. But my department is pretty good in that they will cover at least 1 trip every single year. And so that's really, really nice. And you could potentially squeeze out 2 depending on how much they cost. And that's very, very helpful, because this allows you to get back into, as I always say, turning back on your research mindset. And so you get to go back and interact with people. Sometimes they're at PUIs, sometimes they're at R1 institutions. I just went to Flowhead a couple of weeks ago, and that was really great experience, just being able to interact with those people. And it kind of rejuvenates you a little bit, because sometimes you sit here and you interact with undergrads, and that's what you want to do. But it's also nice sometimes to get that extra rejuvenation, recharge things of, yes, let's get some research done. It's let's get these new ideas out there. And so being able to interact with colleagues is really great. And if your university is just like, we do not pay for people to travel, that becomes really difficult, and you get kind of isolated in that regard. So that's just something I wanted to add to think about.
Awesome. Great advice. So next question, also kind of similar in terms of funding and concerns about all of that. So how much do you feel your department listens to your concerns, whether that's in regards to work-life balance, funding DEI efforts, new facilities or instruments, and takes action to address them? How much of that is influenced by state funding or outside donors or those types of things?
Okay, I guess I'll go. So one thing I really liked when I came on my interview here at the University of Tampa was how supportive I could tell that the university was of colleagues. And that has proven to be 100% true. When something comes up, somebody has some sort of health issue that causes them to drop off the map for a month or 2, we cover it, no problem. I mean, when somebody goes on maternity leave, we cover those sections. we're very supportive of one another. When you just need to have a day that you're going to a conference, so you need a lab covered, we cover that. We will listen to each other, we help one another. If somebody needs something, we're right there on top of it. And that's something that I could tell from the interviews. It's difficult to tell before then, but I asked a lot of questions about that kind of thing. You know, how are people supportive? And it was abundantly clear from that people would be there for the things that I wanted to get done. And as far as new facilities and stuff, we're constantly thinking about improvements to that. Sometimes we get instruments granted to us, but most of the time we're applying for these grants, hoping to get an instrument. We actually were able to get an Orbitrap mass spectrometer off of one of these grants. And then the university, we applied for a new NMR. We didn't get it, and the university actually decided just to go ahead and get a new NMR. And that was really, really nice. And so they have invested a lot with regards to that. We're private, so we're not really influenced by state funding, but we are a tuition-driven university. We have basically no endowment. I don't think that's something that they would be upset at me saying. We have basically no endowment. So we're 100% tuition-driven. We have at least one building being constructed on campus pretty much at all times, because we're kind of growing in capacity at least. So we're not, you know, we have fundraise a lot. We fundraise a lot, and that's something that our president, who's retiring, but he was very, very good at, very, very good at fundraising. So first part of that question, I think I feel like my department listens. I think you should definitely find some place that does. It could be pretty miserable if they don't have your back. I've definitely seen and heard about that, and you feel like you're doing it alone. So don't get into a situation like that. But then also, again, as I was saying, funding wise, our university is pretty good about funding stuff.
I would echo for sure what you said about finding out who your colleagues are. When I came before this century, we didn't have a lot of things in place just because nobody had thought of them. But my institution has been really open to changing. I had my first 2 children and there was no maternity leave policy, and I was too anxious to ask, like I wasn't tenured, so I just didn't have maternity leave. But after that, someone with tenure said, hey, we should have a maternity leave policy. And we have a very good one now, and the university was very supportive. But so I'd say my colleagues are supportive and open, and the administration is open, but maybe you have to find the avenues to advocate for what you need. And I remember my first year, my department chair came by. Like I said, at that year, I was a 60% appointment, and he stopped by my office at 5 o'clock and he said, why are you still here? We're not paying you to be here. Now, in reality, I still had to teach the next morning and I hadn't prepared my course. So I couldn't go home, but just that message that he was supportive of the fact that they didn't expect me to work 100% when they were paying me 60%. And that has been my experience with my colleagues in general. You do have to ask, because we're all kind of like I said, independent contractors. We've all got our heads down on what we need to get done. But if you have colleagues that are nice people and you're willing to stick your neck out and ask, I'm in an environment where people will come through, like Brett talked about, and will help.
So I feel very fortunate to be at St. Mary's. Like within the department, we're very supportive. Depending on what the governance structure is, your chair of the department might have different levels of, I guess, influence. So for us, our chair does not have as much influence as our dean of the School of Science. And so I think one of the reasons that really attracted me to St. Mary's College was actually our dean at the time. So our dean was very good at helping us find funding for instruments. There was a story where one of the faculties wanted an NMR. They applied for NSF MRI, a major research instrumentation grant. They didn't get it, and the dean of science just went out and got the money for him. So depending on the structure of governance, it'll really matter who actually can make some of these decisions. For us as our dean. And there are some things that we have very limited ability to influence, for example, campus-wide DEI efforts. So for that, I think it's really important to ask your potential employer what the faculty governance structure is. Back at Mills College, we didn't have faculty governance essentially, so it was whatever, it was a very top-down approach. At St. Mary's, we do have a faculty senate. If you talk to different people, they'll give you different opinions of how we function. We do have a faculty senate, and there's always a way to bring up your concerns to the faculty senate, and they'll there are things that we can vote on and things that they can bring to the board. So that's one thing that you can ask about.
Yeah, I want to echo these comments. I think these are all excellent. And I think sometimes, especially pre-tenure, advocacy and your colleagues really go hand in hand. So, there are some times where I need something, but I feel like I don't want to go to the department chair because I'm not tenured, right? Like, something, right? I just need something small. I will say that like my colleagues, so my department is very on the young as far as tenure side goes. So we have 8 non-tenured or tenure track right now faculty, and we have 7 tenured. And so we're kind of in that balance of half and half, but those who are tenured in my department are always willing to provide advice in a situation like, oh, this student wants to, turn in this homework 3 weeks late, but I don't have, right, I already posted the key, whatever it might be, a case that you haven't encountered before, or I caught this person doing this thing, right? Just getting ideas to bounce off of them. And sometimes it can be really hard to ask for something from somebody who feels like they're superior to you, right? They're going to vote on your tenure. But I think having colleagues who are willing to be there and advocate for you, and who recognize that you are, as a pre-tenure faculty, you are in a different position, if we will say power, I suppose power-wise, right? But you are in a different position than a person who has tenure, and recognizing that they are in a position that they can help you is really, really important. And not being afraid, even though it's really hard, to ask those people, and making sure you choose a place that you do have that. Like 2 weeks ago, I went to ACS and I had all of my classes covered for the entire week. I just asked around like, hey, could you cover this class? Could you do this? And everything was covered. And yeah, no questions asked. My chair, I just said, here's who's covering my classes. And she said, that's excellent, right? So really an environment that you want to be in, where people are there to support you. When I was starting up my research group, I had budgeted all of these things into my startup costs. And when I got there, the chair was like, you should ask around first and just see if anyone else has it. And I would say over half of the things I had on my startup budget, other people were like, I have it, you can just use it whenever you want. And so that was really helpful, because I was able to then spend my startup on other things. So from resource sharing to advocacy, I think your colleagues make such a huge difference. And while students come and go, colleagues come and go a lot less often. And so making sure that that's something that you're really comfortable with in that environment as much as you can in the interview phase is really important.
Awesome, thank you. So again, moving on to our next question in the chat. This question's from Joe. When coming from larger research institutions for grad school or postdocs, how do you shape project proposals to be appropriate and reasonable for undergrads and smaller departments with potentially limited resources and time? Mainly in the application process, but also interested to hear about this in the context of funding applications.
So I can start on this one. So I think when you're considering projects for undergrads, one really important thing to think about is that if you're doing research during the semester, you have to think about this in terms of small chunks. Like my students, I have a lot of students in my group, but my students typically have 1 to 2 hour chunks a few days a week. And so you have to think about, how am I going to fit this? And so the primarily model in my lab is that somebody sets up a reaction in the morning and they leave a note for the student who's coming in next, right? And then that student maybe runs the TLC and then does the column, right? Whatever that might look like. My students, I have them work together and hand off projects. So it depends on what kind of research you're doing, how much you can kind of chunk up or break up that project, right? But I think that's really one of the biggest things is considering the time constraints of undergrads. They're not full-time researchers, and they might have an exam and they come to you at 8 a.m. and say, I'm supposed to be in lab at 2 o'clock, but I have an exam then and I can't come, or I have an exam at 4 and I need to study, whatever that might be. Like recognizing that you have to be so much more flexible with schedule with undergraduate students. And they are very reliable, hard workers, but they have a lot more schedule limitations than a graduate student does. And so for me, I think when I think about external funding, I know that's kind of at the end of the question, something that I learned the hard way is that I applied for an NIH R15 grant, and I sort of assumed that the preliminary data that I had would demonstrate that undergraduates were capable of fitting this work into their schedules and doing this work. And I think I didn't do a good enough job. And in fact, I know from the comments that I didn't do a good enough job in establishing that my students are doing this work. Undergraduates are capable of doing really good research, really important research. And I think there is a misconception out there that undergraduates can't do really cool, really exciting, really novel research. They can. It's just that you have to plan around and help them build those skills. And so I think planning around how you're going to train students. So I have a model where my students train each other and how you're going to fit things into those small blocks. And then verbalizing that model, verbalizing that you understand this is the model I'm using is really important, both in the application process and when you're going for external funding opportunities.
I guess I can answer this as well. Hard balance, because you want to do unique and interesting things, and the students want that as well. They want to be doing things that you don't want to sell them on something and then they're just doing a glorified science fair project. Like, you want them to be doing things that are in fact interesting and that they can see the potential is there for it to be impactful. And so for me, I'm always trying to think about what are things that we can do. I talked earlier about infrastructure. We don't have a power phase LC type of setup so I'm going to be able to do an anti-selective or specifically there's like reactions. So I know that kind of thing. If I get those kind of questions when I present the research, it's like, we don't have that infrastructure here, but I'm okay with that. And so you have to know what the limits are currently. And if you need to go outside those limits, again, you reach out to colleagues, you look at neighboring institutions, things like that. But I think the main thing you want to decide is like what kind of things you want to do, because you're going to have to train the students accordingly. Become very good at what they do. They can get very good at this kind of thing, but maybe they're not. And so over time, they have to be built up to understand how to do something. So for instance, for me, I only train a certain number of students to basically use anhydrous conditions or work with pyrophorics or anything like that. And I'm in the lab when they're doing it as well, because you're not just going to leave them with a bottle of turbuli and say, please use this, because that's not going to end well. Or even it could, but you're taking a huge risk in doing something like that. So you need to be there with them. And so accordingly, you have to think, is this going to be involved in that kind of thing? And so sometimes you will bridge those gaps yourself. You'll be the one that does that kind of thing. But if there's a bunch of those gaps that are going to require some sort of advanced knowledge, that's probably not the route that you want to go with this kind of thing. And so you want to think about what can they do. I think what Sarah's pointing out with time is right on point. They do only have a certain amount of time here. My students work normally between 4 to 8 hours a week. On average, I would say, probably, depending on how much they're working on a given week. And that's, I mean, you can see that's a huge step down from what you're expecting in graduate school, where you're working, 80 hours a week. And I'd have to have 10 undergrads just to produce the amount of work that a graduate student does. That's probably pretty accurate. So I have 6-ish in the lab generally a given semester, and they work about 4 to 8 hours a week. And I try to give them individual projects. And we discussed before the semester starts, what is your plan going to look like to accomplish research this semester? Or you're going to set something up, so some of them, they'll come in and set something up before they have class, and they'll have back-to-back classes, and then they have their afternoon free. And that's great, because then they have a 4-hour block, the reactions, do the work while they're doing the work, as I say, and then they have an opportunity to work those kind of things up and do columns and whatever else has to be accomplished later in the day. But you do have to work with them. They will. Students come to me and say, I've got an exam. I'm actually really unprepared for this exam. Can I take today to study? Can I do it on Wednesday? And then you work with them and you're flexible, because happy undergrads are the hardest working undergrads. And so it's not, you're not going to work over top of them and just berate them to do work and stuff. They're doing it a lot of times because they're interested and they're excited. And the more that you create this environment where work is a chore and the lab at work is a chore and you've got to get me these results by the end of the week, the less interest they're going to have in it. And so as a result, they're going to be less interested in it. It's still a fact of the matter that when you go to graduate school, you do have to do that kind of thing. And so students that have interest in graduate school, I try to make them very well aware, here's what's going to be expected of you when you go to graduate school. But that doesn't mean we have to enact exactly that on a day-to-day basis here at the undergraduate level. So hopefully I've been able to hint at some of those things that you're asking there. As far as proposals are concerned, yes, actually, one big mistake that I made in the application process, I applied during COVID. So there were positions, R1 positions being advertised in February, PUI positions all over the place. So I just started out right out of the gate. I came out with my, 9 pages, 3 proposals, 3 pages each, and I submitted that to everyone in my first 15 or so applications. And then literally nothing. And I was like, what have I done wrong? And so I actually, Scott had some connection from a PUI professor. And so I sent this to him and he's like, you have scared them. They know there's no way you're going to be able to accomplish this much at a PUI, and that there's no way this is going to happen at their school. So they just, no matter what your application said, they threw it away because they said, this guy doesn't even know what we do here. So then what I did was I scaled it back and I just submitted generally 3 pages and 3 to 4, something in that range. I looked very carefully at what they said in their requirements, and I would submit that. And then all of a sudden I started getting much more activity, because it seemed I had a much more measured response. I clearly knew what was going on. Now, that doesn't mean that we have not worked on all the other things that I had said, but you want to make sure that they understand that you recognize this is a PUI. This is not an R1 institution, and accordingly, you've shaped your application. And pointing out in that application that these are things undergrads can do, that's also very important, because otherwise you seem a little bit tone deaf sometimes. So that was my big mistake that I made on the application process. So you can learn from that and not make the same mistake.
These are all really great advice that are being shared by everyone, and I totally agree with all of that. And what I found to be very important, kind of echoing what Brett was just saying, is in your applications and also your funding applications as well, be very specific about what you think your undergraduates are going to do. You can say, I'm putting 2 undergraduates on this synthesis, and you know what, they can definitely do this because this is a known synthesis with 2 extra steps that they'll be exploring. Like specifically kind of list out how many undergraduates you're planning to recruit for a specific task. I think for me, that's been helpful for me to kind of envision how the project will come along. And I think in a lot of primarily undergraduate institutions, if you are applying to my department as a physical chemist, and if we don't have a physical chemist around, we'll just take your word for how novel this project is. But what we think we can probably kind of tease out from your application is just how much thought you've put into working with undergraduates, because I think at the end of the day, that's a really big part of whether or not you're going to be successful. And then another thing that Jennifer was saying earlier is definitely be open to being flexible once you get there, right? Maybe you get there and you find out that your project is just not going to work out. And that's actually a very common experience for a lot of people that I've talked to. And then being just kind of looking at the resources once you're there, and then kind of pivoting, kind of reshaping your research. Definitely, I think at a PUI, you want to be very open and flexible with that, and figuring out what your students' strong suits are. In terms of funding, kind of like I said, really be specific about what you want your undergraduates to be doing. And in case you didn't know this, a lot of different funding agencies, they have specific funds that you will not be competing with University of Illinois, essentially. So, for example, if you do synthesis or anything related to petroleum, the American Chemical Society has the Petroleum Research Fund. They have a specific fund for PUIs and 2-year institutions and R2s. So you won't be competing with R1s. The same with NSF. They have things like the LEAPS program for pre-tenure faculty. Right. So, and the people that will be reviewing those grants, I won't say 100% of the time, but they try to find people that are also in primarily undergraduate students. So they will have a better idea of like how successful you might be in these projects.
So thank you all for those advice. Before we move on, there was another question that was sent to me in the chat. Let me find it. So with everything you need to juggle in your job itself, how do you manage to have a life outside of work, including family time, personal time?
I'd be happy to take that. I think if you're at University of Illinois, I think you all have a little bit of perfectionist inside of you. I think for me is, I think earlier Jennifer was also saying that being able to prioritize. And I used to think that I have to do everything to 110%. Now it's more like there's some things on some days, it's 60% is probably good enough because the last 40%, no one's going to be able to feel that except you. Right. So kind of, I think that's been helpful for me. And another thing is I went through this course with the Faculty Success Program. It's an online course. And we were reading about perfectionism, and it said in the articles, like, if you're a perfectionist yourself, you're projecting all these perfectionist values on other people too. And then usually with like quote unquote perfectionists, like your relationships around you are kind of like impacted detrimentally because you also project this idea of perfectionism on them. But really high achieving people, they know how to prioritize and kind of know like this is the time to do 110 on this, but maybe 30% on that. It's very generic, I'm sorry, but.
So I have 5 children. So I have, with my husband, both of us not being full-time all the time, figured out how to balance things. You've also heard me say I've had some really rough years. Had childcare, I've had elder care, all of the things that come over a life that you don't always know when they're coming. But I think I look for seasons. So I'll say this is a season, this is a year that I see coming that's just going to be brutal. And acknowledging that, I already, like you said, Amy, in terms of priorities, what are the things that I can let go? Like maybe this year my kids are not going to be in music and gymnastics classes because I can't get them there. They have to pick one or the other. Or maybe I ask, can I be off one committee this year? Because I know that I've got this extra course prep. Or we hire housekeepers some years. You're not going to have the income that you've got at other schools, that full stop. But there have been years when we said that's how we're going to keep our sanity, is this year we're just going to hire a housekeeper, right? And so you have to make those, I think, reassessments of your life. And the seasons can be year to year, or they can be family circumstances that change. But yeah, I guess I lost my other point because I have old brain, so I'll quit there.
Sorry for jumping back in. I just thought of something that I was really helpful for me, and I thought I'd shared something a little bit more substantial. And I also learned this from my online class that I was fortunate enough to take, is being really intentional with your time. And when I mean intentional, really write it out. So there's this exercise that I go through every semester is I list out my goals for every single week. And then I'd say, this semester, I want this percentage of my time to go into teaching, this percentage of my time to go into research. Because, for example, if I have a grant that I want to apply to, that's definitely like on the top of my list. And so I would have like a specific goal for every week, depending on like what each deadline is or when exams are. And then the Friday before every week, I put all of those hours, like really hour by hour, what I would be doing into the calendar. So in the first couple of iterations, like the first few months that you do this, you'll find that you're not following your calendar at all. But after a semester, you have a better idea of what each task will take you. And it really does get better and better. And right now, I really just go off of my Google Calendar. And, you know, if this is something that I have only allotted time until 6:30, I'm done. I don't do more. And, you know, so maybe next week I adjust a little bit to kind of put more time back into that. But I think that's really helped me a lot, especially with an anxious personality, with 500 things that I have to do all the time, and with deadlines that are 3 years away. That's really helped me kind of like visualize where I would be. Yeah, sorry for jumping back in.
Well, I'll jump back into, because now I finally remembered. The other thing that helps me prioritize is who it will affect if I cut corners. So part of that prioritizing is, you know, if I cut corners on class prep, is this just going to be embarrassing to me, or is this going to make it hard for my students to learn, right? If I grade a little faster, I don't write as many comments, is this something that the students are going to learn from, or they're not going to read my comments anyway? If I'm on a committee and I don't show up with my part of the work at the next meeting, how does that impact everybody else in terms of wasting their time or putting more burden on them? And so I think that's really important also, as you try to prioritize as a perfectionist, is recognizing, like you said, what things could go.
Yeah, I will say definitely, I think making sure that you prioritize that time. And I have still not figured out how to get my grading done at work. I always am grading at home, but one thing that I do is that I don't post any grades when I am not at school, or when it's not like regular business hours, because I don't want my students to expect that, oh, well, she normally grades on Sundays, so where's my grade? It should be there. Or whatever that might be, right? That oh, well, normally she posts this grade by 8 p.m. on Thursday. What is she doing, right? So I try to make it that I'm not giving students the illusion that I'm grading their things at night, because they would then expect me to be around my email, to be responsive to them, right? And you know, there are times and seasons where that is okay, right? Sometimes if I do see their email, I might respond to them in like later at night, but I try to make it clear that you know, when I'm grading, I'm actually try to turn off my email, because it really distracts me and makes my grading less efficient, and also I think less effective. And one thing that I have tried to balance with grading is, you know, when you're in graduate school, even like if you're working in a job after that, right? If you're editing someone's like manuscript or someone's writing, it has to be perfect, right? But students aren't in that position. Students are in the position that like you want to give them like 2 or 3 maybe meaningful sentences that they might read, and that they can take something home that, okay, next time I'm going to focus on my introduction, or whatever that might be, right? Kind of letting that go was hard for me, that like, oh, but this is so spelled wrong so many times, and I need to fix it every single place, but they're never going to look at that. So it's not worth my time to do that, to just kind of give them that overarching feedback that they can take home a couple of messages. And that really saves me a lot of time too, in the long run, although it's hard still for me to do. So.
Oh, we're low on time, but I'll give one thing that to me is the big thing I repeat over and over again to my wife. I say, is this sustainable? And if it's something that is going to be a long-term thing, like classes, if you take this job, you will teach classes every single semester. So are you setting up something that is sustainable? Or is this just a short-term, this is just this week? And if it's just this week kind of thing, you can roll with that for a week and be okay. But you want to set up things where it's sustainable. You don't want to constantly be writing new problem sets for your class. You don't want to be constantly rewriting the post lab every single time for your class, rewriting new, you want to get something so that you can repeat this action over and over again. You feel like you know what's going to happen. You have that expectation. There's a routine to it. And so sometimes I'll be doing whatever thing, and it's like, I'll say, this is not sustainable. I've got to figure out a way to make this more streamlined or make this work, because as it stands, this is not going to work. This is not going to last me for, you know, the next month, much less the next several years. This involvement. So that's something I always try to think about. It's definitely getting something that is sustainable. And I am considering taking Sarah's approach of not posting grades during working hours, because I will post grades at any time whenever I get it done and stuff like that. And I'm actually pretty bad about responding to email at all hours of the day and night. So that's something I like Sarah's ambition on that. I think I will consider instituting that to try to better myself in that regard. But that's what I've got. Just as a note, since I know we're kind of wrapping up here, if you have questions, I will just speak for myself on this. Feel free to email me about this kind of stuff. I want to help people, especially with so much mystery that surrounds this process. If you're getting in there, again, it took me emailing somebody to find out that I was overloading these committees with the research ideas. So if you have questions about that kind of stuff, feel free to email me. I also put my email. But yeah, I'm happy to help out as much as possible.
And for postdocs that are here, if you're in chemistry, the ACS postdoc to faculty workshop, they're taking applications right now, and it's all paid for a weekend. So it's a nice workshop to do networking and kind of learn about different institutions.
Awesome. Well, on that note, thank you all to all our attendees for all those wonderful questions. I know you still may have more questions, but hopefully this session gives you a sneak peek into life in working at a PUI. If, as the panelists said, if you have more questions, feel free to reach out to them via email, add them on LinkedIn, and continue the conversation. I want to thank all our panelists again so much for being so generous with their time and with their advice. We really do appreciate it. And here's a virtual round of applause for you. And tomorrow, we're going to be doing the second panel for our Graduate Careers Exploration Week, which will be careers in academia, but focused on non-teaching roles. So hopefully I'll get to see more of you there tomorrow as well. But again, in the meantime, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. But thank you all so much for being here, and have a wonderful rest of your day.